unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
Art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Art Pod. As you can see, we're shooting on location today at Moss House, and is it BIPOC or BIPOC? BIPOC Art Studio, which is an incredible space. It was started in 2020 by Jeremy Dennis, and it serves as a communal art space, and it's based on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in Southampton, New York. And my guest today will talk a little bit more about that later on. But thank you, Brianna, for being willing to do this with me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So a little bit about Brianna. Brianna Hernández is a Chicana artist, curator, educator, and death doula, guided by socially engaged practices. In the studio, she creates multimedia installations focused on end-of-life care, grief, and mourning rituals based on lived experience, cultural research, and collaborations with peers. In developing as an artist, Brianna credits her late mother, Sylvia D. Hernández, as her most significant mentor and inspiration for the creativity, resilience, and compassion she demonstrated throughout her life. Hernández has participated in residencies at McDowell, the Watermill Center, Santa Fe Art Institute, the Constance Stalton-Stall Foundation for the Art Spaces, and Farewell House. She proudly serves as the director of curation and board secretary of Maz House, BIPOC Art Studio on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation, and as assistant curator at the Parrish Art Museum. Additionally, she is the board treasurer at Walker's Point Center for the Arts and committee member for the Chicana? Gente. Chicana Soimos?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a play on words. It's a combination of two different words. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me because I'm awful at these things. Chicano's Arts Fund of the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. So I'm excited to get into everything you. So before we start, usually I'll ask my guests to kind of, say what they're doing now and everything. But I really want to touch on you being a death doula because I have never been exposed to one. And I'm sure a lot of my listeners haven't either. So I kind of wanted to get an understanding of who a death doula is, what do you do, and maybe we can start there.
Yeah. Great. It's a great opportunity to introduce folks to because it's something that it's not necessarily new. It's more reemerging, but it's reemerging in very unique ways. So the simplest comparison that a lot of death doulas give is comparing it to a birth doula, which more and more people are familiar with.
Yeah. Someone
supporting the birthing process, either from the very, very beginning or halfway through, or really those, final weeks leading up to the birth. And similarly, a death doula is someone that supports the dying process. And it's a non-medical role, but there are a lot of death doulas who have other backgrounds that can include medicine. And so it's something that's very fluid, but it's also fluid in the sense of similar to a birth doula, you might help someone with advanced planning and all the paperwork, like when they're not even thinking that's, I don't have a diagnosis. I, haven't gotten to a certain age, but I just want to be prepared. Or you can be someone helping with a family that has an active terminal diagnosis. Or even if a loss happens really suddenly, you can be a support role in that regard. So it's really a range of when you might show up to provide support. But that support is really unique to the specialty of the death doula. So the person that did the training program I went through, Alo Arthur, began as an attorney. And so a lot of her first rounds with clients were focused on those legal aspects that relate to death and dying. And some folks are very, very focused on bedside service and making sure that you're providing comfort and the fulfilling the requests and the wishes of the dying person. And sometimes that means if they need some time to be sitting with a family member, that you get up and you go tidy something around the house. And sometimes it means you're helping with like gentle massage or setting the scene in the room to be a peaceful one for them. Sometimes that means you're helping to communicate their wishes if it's like a difficult conversation for a family. But it really is based on your specialty. Some death doulas have a religious background that they focus on. Some have a background in psychology that they bring into it. And for me, I'm an artist. And so I focus on how art can be a tool within the death and dying process. And that can be in the midst of someone who's actively dying and like having it be an outlet, having it be a source for legacy building. But also a lot of the work that I do is on the front end of it for education around death and dying. So how can art be a tool to get people more comfortable talking about what that means and what they would want so that they have a little bit of preparedness before a crisis happens. Yeah. And I think for me, I found that's where I provide the most service in my death doulaship is being one of arts education for death education. Mm-hmm. Oh, we lost the lights. It's a motion sensor. We're sitting too still. But yeah, so a lot of my focus is on how we can have a workshop or an informational session using art to open up that conversation and get people more comfortable talking about it, thinking about it, planning for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, death is one of the most universal experiences that, you know, human beings have and other beings have. But it can often feel like people shy away from the topic or, you know, don't really want to talk about it. And grief can often feel like a very lonely or personal experience. And obviously, you know, there's death rituals that extend and are different across races, cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds. How do you consider these things in your death work?
Yeah, I mean, something that's really important in the community of death doulas, like a lot of us are, it's not it's a re-emerging field, but it's not a huge one at the moment. And so a lot of us are very interconnected and we try to support each other and like, you know, ask questions of how did you handle this? How did you handle this? Or I have a resource. Hey, you have a resource. And so I think a lot of us have this mindset of meeting people where they are at and being mindful that we are providing what someone is needing and not kind of like projecting what we think should be. And so it's something where you have to be really honest with yourself about what you're comfortable with. So my instructor, Elua, has this example of if you're sitting with someone and like their version of comfort in dying is like reading from a specific holy text and you're not comfortable with that, then you need to like step back and pair them with someone that you know can provide that for them. Or in reverse, like it's not something that you want to force yourself to do something that you can't genuinely show up for someone. And it's also something where you don't want to project what you think someone should do. Yeah. Sometimes if you're showing up to give someone that really intimate support, it's easy to think, oh, well, I can just talk them into this conversation of like how they should be okay with this. But some people never get to that point. Yeah. And you have to really be okay with them not being okay with it and provide the needs that will help them get as close as possible to their version of a good death.
Yeah. And how did you get started in this?
Well, actually, it's really a big, you know, pain point for me, but it started out
I mean, if you're not comfortable talking about
it. I actually enjoy talking about it because I think it's similar to what I mentioned earlier. It's this entry point to start breaking down that discomfort. So I was my mother's caregiver in the final year of her life. And going into it, I didn't know anything. I was completely blindsided by not only the emotional and psychological aspect, but the logistics even. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't understand what active signs of dying even were. And so when something was going wrong with her, I thought like, oh, I need to do something. But looking back, I probably really didn't need to do anything. And so that started for me as an artist. I started making work about it. It started that journey of making work about it, but also continuing to research, because I love to research as part of a process, and finding a lot of resources around caregiving of, you know, what I should have known if I had been able to have these more honest conversations before, this crisis happened. And also learning more about the medical side, the funeral industry around tools and resources. And so I started building that into the artwork that I was making, the workshops about art that I was making. And it just naturally evolved from there. That's how I found out about death doulas and eventually took a program, is because I was researching and trying to find all the ways that I could make the work more accessible and have takeaways for people, like to experience something about death and grief, but then have something to take away where they didn't feel like they're just like, have all these things come up and then left high and dry, So it was a natural evolution of like the art and the research back and forth. But it really started with my mother and feeling like I wish I would have known so many things before this happened. Not because it would have, saved her life, or not because it would have changed that grief of losing her is painful, but because there were a lot of other things that could have been lessened and that could have been smoother for her, for me, for my siblings, for all the friends and family that are involved. And so it became this kind of like mission where at first I really needed to express how I was feeling in this acute grief. But the more I was working at it, the more I realized like, this is something that I can put out there as a tool for other people too, because it's definitely not a unique experience to lose someone. And it's less and less, oh my gosh, less and less a unique experience to lose someone to cancer. And so I think there's really a community to be found in speaking more openly about it.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this seems like a very kind of heavy responsibility in terms of emotions, because, death, grief, sadness, these are extremely heavy emotions to carry. How do you manage to kind of, take that on yourself, and then how do you kind of process it?
I think really leaning into the arts portion of it helps, because I feel so just really grateful for the opportunity to talk about my experience through my art. And that's something that not a lot of people have, to deal with the traumatic things that they've experienced. And so I always kind of just feel more so grateful that not only that I have that, but that I can also support other people by providing a platform for that. Even if they don't consider themselves to be creative, they can come to a workshop, we can have a conversation. They can also find these tools for themselves. And for me, it's really like a mutual source of healing, because you see that they also understand this, this pain, or you see that they have this fear of what that might be like, and you can really relate to it and find, I think, a camaraderie in trying to navigate it together. It's always harder alone. Yeah. And so I think for me, it's more so something that is fulfilling than draining, because I know that even if it's just like one little piece of the puzzle, being able to help someone like have a little bit better handle on thinking about it, planning for it, or releasing their own grief is really a gift.
Yeah. 100%. So obviously, this sort of death work is a big aspect in your artistic practice. And I think this is a great way for us to segue into talking a little bit more about your practice and kind of what it is that, you feature in your art, kind of what the themes are, kind of what your inspiration is.
Yeah. So I have a few different concurrent series that I work on. The first is a video series where it's a lot of where I'm in the video. It's not necessarily a performance, but it's more performative. And each video is really from those early years. And there's a few newer ones, but it started in those early years of more acute grief, where I was trying to understand my emotions around what happened and process a lot of the trauma. Because when you're providing end-of-life care, especially if you don't know what you're doing when you go into it, like I did, there's so many things that can go wrong. And there's a lot of emotions for yourself, for the person. And you're also kind of living with this knowledge that when your job is done as a caregiver, it's because this person has passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as someone's daughter, it's really painful. And so I was trying to unpack what had happened, but also how it overlapped with the grief afterwards when she was gone. And so a lot of these videos are untangling those different layers. And they're I have myself in the video, like performing different actions. Some of them are very like aggressive movements, and some of them are more meditative. And I try to present them more as installations, because I feel like videos tend to be, it's just on a wall, you're just sitting there watching it. And try to give people the sense of being in those spaces with me. Because it's really hard to capture that kind of experience. Nobody can ever really know what it's like. They might have had a similar experience, or they might understand in theory, but giving some of those visceral senses of what does this space feel like, look like, is a part of it for sharing like the honesty of grief. A lot of times grief is presented as this hallmark 5 stages that's like fake. So just trying to be raw about it and honest about it. And from there, I started an additional series that was more specific to the logistics of caregiving. And so taking some of that very common home caregiver equipment, so very, I guess, highly used tool would be like chucks, which are these bed pads. Mm-hmm. For someone, make sure that their bedding stays clean, or mouth swabs to help someone freshen up or have a little bit of moisture if they're dealing with dryness, or maybe they're not drinking anymore, and so you're providing just like a little bit of quenching that thirst that is not necessarily one internally but more like mentally. Taking these things and gilding them with silver and gold and copper, and trying to show how they can really reflect back on the caregiver. Most of the time, these materials are like cheap plastic, mm-hmm. and it's associated with some bodily process that can be really frustrating to deal with. And then you throw it out and you're like, I hate this, but I was thinking of it more from a perspective of, well, the person who's using this is providing a very sacred form of care. And I think in elevating this tool, then whoever approaches it and is using it can hopefully see that back in themselves. There's not really a lot of support for family caregivers. There's, some things popping up here and there, but it's not across the board. And it's not really, some states might have a program, another state has a different one. It's not really standardized. And so thinking of this more as like a mental tool that you can use for yourself to remember how important it is what you're doing, that it's easy to feel like, oh, why is this happening to me? Why do I have to deal with this? Yeah. But more so remembering how much trust someone is placing in you to do these things for them. Whether it was by choice or not, it still ends up being a really important exercise of trust and of love,
Yeah. Sometimes you're the last person they see before they go.
Yeah. And, and sometimes those elements of care, even if they're not, like I said, eating or drinking, or even if they're not getting up to go to the bathroom anymore, it gives them a sense that they still have like their dignity and their sense of self, because they can like be sat up and feel like they're not worried about this extra thing, mm-hmm. because they're already dealing with so much. They're processing so much internally with their own life, but also with the physical sense of what's happening from typically a progressive illness. Mm-hmm. And so it's this little bit of comfort that only the person who's there at the end can really provide. And so just trying to remember that in the midst of the chaos and the stress. And a more recent series that is, they're all kind of ongoing and overlapping in my mind, is kind of stepping more into the communal idea of grief and mourning by creating burial markers and burial vessels out of organic materials. So starting first with grave markers made out of living plants, but also burial vessels made out of dried materials like mosses and mushrooms and like an urn made out of soap and beeswax. And so how our conventional burial practices are right now is something that is really new, but for some reason has like latched on to people's fear around the topic, where there's a lot of preservation involved that is really harmful to the environment, but also really, I feel, kind of dehumanizing, because it does not allow someone to really have themselves like return to the earth. Yeah. And it doesn't allow someone who's grieving to process the reality of that, even on this small level where you might know that someone's dead, you might have watched them be buried, you might know that they've been gone for X amount of years, but having this added layer of the preservation of the body in and of itself with things like embalming, but also the preservation of their grave through a lot of these more modern caskets, and then the way that cemeteries have them set up in this pristine manufactured kind of way. I really do think it adds this layer of separation where we're not able to process what's actually happening on even just that smaller internal level. And so this series was more trying to have a whimsical, a little bit humorous view of green burial as something that's been around forever, but more reintroducing it through something that might make someone laugh a little bit, like when they walk up and see a casket made of moss. It's called a fairy garden. They're like, what is this? And so each of the series is, like I said, they're all ongoing, but for me, they're very intertwined, because you can't really think about advanced planning without thinking about what you're going to be buried in.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't really think about, caregiving and providing end-of-life care without thinking about grief. And so they kind of all fluctuate, and the burial vessels is a newer series, but they're all just being added to really organically over time. Yeah.
It's for me personally, and this is just me, because Poland has this huge culture of, obviously preservation of the bodies, burying them. Then we sort of build like these big monuments. As I mentioned before, my grandpa was a stonemason. He used to make these headstones for like graves, and they're extremely like opulent. They become like almost sculptures, and people return to these graves all the time as kind of like the final resting place of this person. And then I was talking to my family about this the other day. I'm just like, if I go, just please burn me, take my ashes and turn them into like a ring or something that you can carry forever. But I mean, again, this is like personal to everybody. Everyone kind of has the way that they want to be buried, or hopefully, they have that decision. Not everyone, unfortunately, gets that. But I think that's a very personal process, as is grief.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess, to add to that, I would say like a lot of the work that I do, especially with that series, is not to say, oh, you shouldn't want something else other than green burial, but more to say, as a counter to the standard that we have, and like, hey, we can consider other options. You don't have to be forced into the convention just because you didn't know something else existed, or because you hadn't thought about planning and now you're just panicking and making a quick decision. And so, like if you want to be turned into like a piece of jewelry, hell yeah. Do it. That's awesome.
And then just leave me with the generations of like my ancestors. Just take me from one to the other.
Family heirloom.
Yeah, I will be the family heirloom. Yes.
I kind of love that.
Yeah. So that's my thing. But and obviously, for me also, I'm like extremely environmentally conscious. So I think, we also need to really consider these things, for future generations as well, because, we have a limited amount of space.
Yeah. That's becoming more and more of a concern, especially in city centers. Yeah. There's some folks in architecture and city planning who are already, spearheading the research and the proposals for alternatives to this, because there's just not enough space to bury the way that we bury, especially in like a big city. Yeah.
And the population is just increasing and growing year to year. So, I mean, eventually we will just be living on top of ourselves. Okay, but now that we've covered that topic, and thank you for sharing your practice, you also have a million other jobs. So let's get into that. I want to start with your work at Moss House.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about Moss House first, and then kind of what you do here and what your day-to-day looks like?
Yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, Moss House is a communal art space on the Shinnecock Reservation that was founded by Jeremy Dennis. So he's the lead artist. And he also kind of manages the residency portion of Moss House. So we have year-round artists in residence. And then my role is curating in the gallery space, which is like roughly 2 to 3 month long shows. And also Jeremy's mother, Denise Silva Dennis, who's also an artist, runs weekly workshops where we're sitting right now.
Yes, look at the space.
So a lot of traditional beadwork, leatherwork, but she also teaches painting classes. And then oftentimes folks who are in residence will host like a pop-up workshop while they're here. And then Jeremy's cousin Hunter actually did a podcast, a Moss House podcast. For the past couple of years, the four of us have been working at Moss House under a grant through the Mellon Foundation, Creatives Rebuild New York. And so that was a really great opportunity through their artist employment program to really kick off the work that we do here. We had all been kind of like volunteer doing stuff with Moss House before that, especially in starting up and like becoming a nonprofit. But this past couple of years through that grant has really accelerated a lot, where we can, provide different honorariums and free programs and all these other things. And so it's very like a small, tight-knit team.
Okay.
We do
as
a lot.
Most nonprofits are.
Yeah. It's so this space is actually originally built by Jeremy's grandfather. The original footprint of the house was just the front where the gallery is with the basement underneath. And over the decades, his grandfather and his uncles built additions, and it kind of like spread out into this like multi-split level home. And at one point, so his grandparents raised his mom here and her siblings. And at one point, his mom raised him and his sister here, and there were other cousins and stuff. So very much like a family space, like multi-generational, multiple different families from, larger extended family. And as his grandmother, Ma is her nickname, was passing away, she said that she wanted the space to become a community space for people to learn about like Shinnecock culture. And so over the years, it remained a family home, but in 2020, it was a huge renovation project that Jeremy and his family started to kind of revitalize the space to really fulfill her wish. Yeah. Which is really just touching. Talk about a legacy project. It's an amazing and wonderful gift of love and legacy for her real name is Loretta. Everybody called her Ma, for Loretta. And so it's still a place where people live, just now it's artists. And it used to be, they would have little events here when she was still alive where the community would come through and have little pop-up shops or different dancing events. And so it really it's not unprecedented for there to be like activities and events and performances happening out in the yard and stuff. Yeah. So it's really just a continuation of that in a nonprofit form, and one that is both supporting artists who are coming out here and supporting artists who are exhibiting, but is also providing folks a source of education and understanding of Shinnecock, because a lot of the space here is dedicated to that history. And people who maybe never knew anything before, they come away learning so much. And, you find people wanting to support because they got to do a tour and like learn this like piece of history through this family home. Yeah. So it's a really special thing to be a part of. And I think we all like take a lot of pride in the work that we do because it's very fulfilling, and it feels like we're all kind of like in it together too. Like I'll come to some of Denise's workshops, obviously. And then for the shows that we have on view, like different members of the community are on view. And so it's really this reciprocal space for all of us.
So for anyone who wants to visit, can you tell us how they can come and see you guys or like participate in workshops?
Yeah. So if you are on the website and you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get updates on all the events. There's a ton of events. Oh my gosh. Like there's always something
busy.
To see. Yeah. Either if it's not an exhibition opening, it's a workshop or a performance or an open studio with one of the artists in residence. So the newsletter is the best way to stay up to date on all of that. But also we post a lot on Instagram. And so you can see things there. But on our contact page is where you'll find like the address and the map, because being on a reservation, like there's a specific way that you need to enter the space as a guest. And so that's the best way to find us, but it's all right now by appointment unless it's an event. So yeah, hopefully soon we'll have open hours. But right now, given that it's a multi-purpose space, it's by appointment. But we have so many events that you could probably just pick one and, come and see, if you're coming to a workshop and you're walking through the galleries before you come down, or if you come to like meet the artist in residence and then you want to like, go walk around and see some of the art that's like outdoors. There's a lot of ways you can check things out and like meet with one of us or just come on your own and, like I said, hop into one of the events. We have a lot of offsite events too in collaboration with other local organizations. So there's a lot of ways to plug in, but the newsletter is definitely the best way to stay up to date. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the Artist in Residence program, how artists can apply, how long it is?
Yeah. So there's an application form on the website. It's closed right now because we were booked through the year.
Wow.
But yeah.
Popular. All right.
Yeah. But it tends to open like in December is when it like reopens for the next year. But it's a very simple process. It's really focused on like we ask folks to do one sort of community event. And like I said, that can be open studio. You can be one of the workshop leads. You can do a presentation, but we just want to have something that each artist offers back to the community. And so that's something that we ask about in the application. But really, it's not restricted to any type of medium or any specific output while you're here. It's really meant to be your time to do whatever you need to do. So if you want to spend the rest of the time like reading, because we have a great library, or if you want to go and explore the area and like drive around and look at the beaches and just like kind of reset, or if
and
you
the
want
area is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous place. Or if you want to like come down here and like just make a bunch of stuff, like you can do that too. So it's very fluid in that way. And most people come for about 2 weeks, but it's like 1 to 4 weeks is the range that we ask of people. But sometimes for a lot of folks like that are working or have kids, 1 week is ideal because they can't be away too long, but it's a good enough time to like hop away, especially the folks who are coming in from the city. Like you just take the train out. And so, yeah, that's roughly 2 weeks is I would say the average though.
Do you only extend this to visual artists, or can it be like writers, performance artists?
Yeah, it's open to anybody.
Okay.
So we've actually had a good number of artists who do some form of performance. And we've had a couple of writers, and sometimes they're, writers in the sense that maybe they're working on a book, and other times they're working on like their own piece that they're writing, but also performing in. And so it's a good mix. Like we don't restrict it to anything, but it is a space that we're continuously building out. And so like we don't have, a giant kiln. So if somebody's making ceramics, like you're not gonna be able to fire something here. And things
Limit
like that.
your expectations a little bit.
Yeah, like we're building towards different opportunities. But yeah, it's open in terms of like who it is that wants to come.
Okay, great. So what would you say is your favorite thing about your role here?
Oh my gosh. I mean, okay, that's a hard question because I feel like I love so many things just about Ma's House in general. But for my role, I think because I'm an artist, being able to curate in this space, which is like, Jeremy's also an artist. So is Denise, and so is Hunter. And so it's like, we're all creatives running a space. And so we get to kind of make up the rules, you know? It's not this kind of formal, like, Western institutional idea of like how you put on a show, you know? It's very experimental and we can have a lot of fun with it. And each show is so different because obviously you're working with different artists or different projects. But I think, yeah, just having that like creative freedom as an artist who is curating, it's very, like I said, fluid and can be kind of unpredictable of like how is the perfect way that this is going to come together in this space, which is a dedicated gallery space, but it's also like the front entry of a home, you know? And so it's very fun in that way. It never looks the same. Okay. You know?
So on the flip side, what's the most challenging aspect of your job?
I think we were talking about this a little bit before we started. Every nonprofit really has to go through the ringer with like finding funding.
Don't I know it?
It like never ends, you know? And I feel like I've worked at different sizes of nonprofits and it doesn't really matter what the scale is. Like it's always something you have to work on. Yeah. So I mean, just typical answer, but that's I think the most stressful is like you got to really stay on top of it. And sometimes even when you do, it's still like, you know, funding is fickle. So.
It's true. And you need it, obviously, you know, to stay afloat and to keep everything going. And, you know, I wish that governments and, you know, state-run programming was a little bit easier and being like, you know what, here it is. Like instead of you kind of scraping and scrounging and begging, essentially, for funding. Well, that's a good one. Okay. So also while you're, before we go to the next question, I also wanted to ask you, what are some exciting projects that you're working on at Moss House that you're excited about?
Yeah. So there's a few. Well, right now, so I typically do the curatorial work, but for this summer right now is a special show that Jeremy curated that is called Shinnecock Speaks, and it's featuring all Shinnecock artists. And that's on view right now. And I think it's really exciting, especially for the community, because there's so many artists here that, you know, are showing off their work, and everybody who comes through gets to see like how many different kinds of talented artists are like right here, you know? So that's really special. And the next show that I'm jumping back to curate is actually all about death and dying. And it's based on an online exhibition that I did for Hyperallergic for their journalism fellowship for curators. And so it's exciting because I'm getting to revisit this project that I did at the beginning of the year virtually.
And it was the Reclaiming Death project, right? Okay.
Yeah. And so it's exciting to kind of revisit it in the physical format and have slightly different work, but working with a lot of the same artists. And so that's coming up. But also it's, you know, like I said, relating to this whole nonprofit struggle of funding, we're actually building up in September for our second, we're calling it a friend-raiser. Okay. It's like a fundraiser, but friend-raiser, more friendly. And it'll be the second time we're doing it, but it'll be the first time it's off-site at a special venue. And so
where's it going to be?
So it's going to be at Canoe Place Inn, which is in Hampton Bays, just like the little neighboring hamlet next to us. And it's exciting because for a small nonprofit where we're this really tight team, and you know we have a very supportive board that just wants to see us shine. It's an exciting momentum to be building towards these kind of fundraisers and benefit events that a lot of the like larger and older institutions out here like kind of have it down.
Oh yeah,
and
of course.
So it's like it's exciting to be taking that next step, like having it at this special set venue and building up like, you know, an art auction and thinking about entertainment, but also like trying to be responsible. But like we don't want to spend any money that we make just like on all this other stuff. And so it's kind of one of those things it's part of the stress of like fundraising, but it's exciting because we get to be creative about it and kind of step into that next level of our nonprofit I guess journey, you know? So if you're around September 19th, it's a Thursday.
Yes, September 19th, guys, come out, support. And even if you're listening and you want to get involved in Moss House, you know, consider really supporting and donating because you guys are doing a fabulous job here.
Thank you. But yeah, you can online. There's you can purchase a ticket, you can RSVP, whatever, and we'll be ready to have a great time.
So that's another thing you can add to your job description: fundraiser.
I feel like as artists, like we always have to do a million things.
Yeah, you have to wear many hats.
Fundraising. Yeah, it's just okay. Which hat am I wearing today?
Yeah, exactly. So on top of working at Moss House, you're also working at the Parrish Museum, which is nearby. It's like about 20 minutes away from here. And you are the art studio and assistant curator.
Assistant curator.
Okay, assistant curator at the Parrish Museum. I'm very familiar with the Parrish, but can you tell us a little bit more about it for those who might not know it that well?
Yeah, so the Parrish Art Museum is a museum in Watermill, New York. It used to be in Southampton, but like 10 years ago, they got a new building. And so it's a space that is really focused on both celebrating the history of the East End of Long Island. There's like this like rich legacy of like artists, doing a lot of really revolutionary work, like and doing a lot of it out here. And so celebrating that history, but also like bringing new contemporary art to this area as well from, places that maybe haven't been out here before, like having those kind of partnerships. And so it's kind of this dual purpose space that is both focused on that side of presenting art, but also on arts education. There's a lot of amazing programs they're called access programs that are focused on providing arts workshops for folks with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or different circumstances where someone might need, art as a tool to access different parts of themselves. And so it's kind of this dual purpose space of presenting and educating through the arts. And there's a lot of work in the collection relating to this area, and a lot of archives. So it's also a place of study. And then there's a lot of new folks coming out here that are like bringing their energy to the space as well. Yeah. So it's similarly, has this kind of multifaceted experience there. But the new building, if you drive past it, it looks like a giant white barn.
Yes. It does.
The new building, it's 10 years old now, but new, compared to the older space, is actually modeled after a lot of the barns that are out here that used to be artist studios. Some of them still are. But so many of them have become historic homes now that they're not necessarily being used by contemporary artists, but a lot of the artists who were out here earlier had these converted barn spaces. And so the architects of the new building were really inspired by that and like the way that the light came in. And so as you walk through, you kind of get that experience of what they say is like, this is how like the work looked when I was making it, you know, because all this natural light and everything.
Yeah, the Parrish, actually, the architecture of the Parrish is like one of my favorites.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
you're like, I already know.
No, it's very, very beautiful. And, if you're out here in the Hamptons for the summer and, you're stuck in traffic on Montauk Highway, just dying inside, slowly creeping by, you can definitely just like, look to your left or right and you see the facade of the Parrish. And there's usually something on there.
Yeah, actually, we've been trying more to have things out on the facade and also in the meadow because we know folks are driving by and sadly getting stuck in traffic, but also like we'll give them something good to look at. So, there's an annual project that goes on the facade, roughly a year is the timeline because it is such a big install, but also more recently having new sculptures go out in the meadow, including newly finished but not newly designed series by Carmen Herrera that was it's a project that she wanted to do for like a long time but never had the resources or the infrastructure to like make it happen. And so it wasn't until like shortly before her passing that she actually got to realize these sculptures that are out there now. They had been on view at one other place, but in the city as like an outdoor public installation, but it's still fairly new in the sense of getting it to like have a life outside of, her sketches and, considering the possibilities of it. So that's, nice thing to look at as you're driving by.
Yeah, I did today. So I also wanted to ask you, what does a assistant curator at a museum do?
A lot of things, similarly, different hats. But I think with the Parrish, given, the location and everything, every museum is a little bit different in terms of scale and functions and who has what responsibilities. But myself and my colleague, Caitlin Halloran, we are the two assistant curators. And a lot of what we do is split between supporting the chief curator and the director on exhibitions that are coming in. So like working with an individual or a group of artists, or if we have a traveling show coming in, they will be kind of heading that show. And then one of us will be assigned to work and support them on all of the logistics and, all the behind the scenes stuff that you'd have, it takes a village.
It does, so I have to say.
We will work to support them on those shows. And then on the other side of things, we also get to work more closely with the collection. And so we'll sift through, we'll look for things, and then we'll pitch shows to, to the chief curator and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then if she's like, yeah, work, let's develop this, then we'll develop a show based on the collection to be kind of like our own project. And so it's a little bit split in that way, but it's kind of fun because we'll have like our own projects, but then we're also supporting these, different artists that are coming through. Like we just opened Cause and Julia Chang.
Just saw it. Yep.
So I got to support those two artists who are just so cool.
I don't know if did you work directly with Brian for the Cause show? Yeah, he's lovely.
He's so nice.
He's very sweet.
Like when an artist is like big like that, you just assume things.
Exactly.
I was like, but he's so nice.
Yeah, no, he's sweet.
Yeah, so that's a lot of fun. And Julia's work is just so beautiful. I was really like excited to see like how it was going to come together because I hadn't seen a lot of it in person before. And so that was, they were opening at the same time. So I was like running back and forth between, the spaces like, do you need anything? Do you need anything? That was really fun. And then Caitlin got to work the prior couple weeks. Caitlin got to work with Sam Moyer and Eddie Martinez. And so it was a nice like balance where we each were supporting two of the summer shows, which always have like a huge energy behind them,
Yeah. So what would you say is your favorite aspect of this job?
My favorite aspect, I think like getting the chance to really work with the collection is a treat for me, like as an assistant curator to like see a project through and it's like up at this museum and I'm like, I get to do that. It's really special. That something to feel like really like a sense of pride that you got to develop this idea. And a lot of times with the collection, there's a lot of living artists out here who are in the collection. And so you get to like show them off and then, they're also excited because their work's on view and it's like, you get to share that with them. So that's been like a real treat, especially as someone who's an artist curator to get, just to see that enthusiasm from like local artists that are part of our collection. And like, I think a lot of artists always worry when their work is in a collection that it's just never going to see the light of day.
Yes.
And so to work with the collection closely and like put stuff out there that either maybe hasn't been seen in a minute or, you can present it in a new way it's a really fun, creative aspect of the job. Yeah.
Do you think that being an artist curator gives you a certain, I don't want to say advantage, but like a certain aspect to the role because you kind of know how to cater to artists because you are one?
I don't know if I would call it an advantage because I think every curator works so differently that, everybody brings a different, unique perspective to the table. But I do find myself like, I will lean towards what I know or what I can infer about what the artist is like most interested in. Like that's my like default approach is just to really think about, I want this artist to like be seen in the light that they want to be seen in. And not necessarily that another curator wouldn't do them justice. There's plenty of ways to show art, but I tend to go into it as like thinking that way.
Yeah.
And so that's just how I approach the work in general. But yeah, I mean, every curator is so different. I think that's what's great, like not only about artists, but about curators is that you can have the same content, but a totally different experience of a show, depending on who's working on it. And it can make it like surprising to see, like, oh, I've never thought about it this way. Like that was something that happened a lot with Artists Choose Parrish last year. It was like this year-long group exhibition of artists in the area pairing their own work with work from the collection. And so you have like this whole year full of artists who are curating from the collection. And a lot of them chose the same thing, but the way they presented it or the things that it was paired with, it was a totally different experience of the work. So I think it really just depends. Like everybody has a different flow.
Yeah, no, for sure. What was one of your favorite exhibitions recently that you've worked on that you really, really loved working on?
Recently, I mean, obviously I was really excited to do my like debut collection show. That was really exciting. But apart from that, was really wonderful to see the work in person of Simone Vega. So we had this great partnership where, Yes Contemporary is an organization that works with contemporary Salvadoran artists, and in partnership with the museum, like having them come out and do a show with the parish, but also do a series of like programs with the education department. And this past year, part of that, which was exciting, was that Simone came and stayed as an artist in residence at Ma's house. And so while he was here working on his show at the museum, he was like drafting things out down here and collecting materials from the area, because a lot of his work incorporates salvaged materials and like creating these like fantasy ideas of like a space station out of like things that he's found or thrifted and things like that. And so he's like walking around Ma's house, like picking up little things. And then you go to the museum and he's putting them together and creating this whole amazing installation that's really looking at like the space race and the impact of the Cold War on Latin America. And it's really thoughtful work, but it comes together in this fantastical way that is just very layered. Like there's all these salvage materials, but then the way that he's arranged them, they look like something totally new. And then he's also bringing in live plants. And so there's this atmosphere that's created. And he's also really super wonderful, sweet person. So great to work with and great to like have him here at Ma's house. And yeah, just really, really it shared a lot like through presentations and with working with education department about his process as well. That was great to see, you know, especially for the youth that are like learning how to be an artist. And then you have someone like that come in and share all their amazing expertise and experience. Yeah. So
how did you end up at the parish?
So, I mean, I just moved out here. I was looking for a job.
Okay. Did you just like apply like online or?
Yeah, I mean, I just applied. At the time, there was an opening for a curatorial fellowship. And so I had applied for that, which was a special grant program. It was supposed to be just a year, but then after the program ended, they were like, "Oh, do you want to stay?" So
like, yes.
So that's it was kind of just like.
So how long have you been there now?
Almost 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact timing, but yeah, about.
Yeah, years get fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm like I don't even know what day it is.
I've been there forever.
Yeah.
Amazing. I also wanted to touch a little bit about, because you recently worked on a show, Beyond the Horizon, interpretations of the landscape in 2024.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working on that show?
Yeah. So that, as I was mentioning earlier, that's the show that was from the collection.
Okay. Yes.
And so it was a real evolved process of going through everything on the collection database and like finding connections, trying to find like what spoke to me, and then pulling together this proposal and really start to finish like fleshing out this show. And so it was a really exciting and educational experience for me because, like I said, it's being honed in on what we have in the collection and trying to find those connecting threads and trying to present it in a new way and like trying to also do justice, especially to like the living artists in the area that are going to come and like see stuff. It was a huge, like I think breakthrough for me to work on that show.
Yeah.
And, like I happily happy to share that, the artists who did come through were really pleased with how their work was presented. And so that made me feel great.
Okay, good.
I was like, ooh.
So what would you have said what would you say was the biggest challenge of either working on that exhibition or any exhibition for like a major museum like the Parrish?
I think for that one in particular is like, there's things that you have to just kind of work with that maybe, and this is like true for a lot of museums, where there's something in the collection that you really want to show, but maybe it's not able to be shown for a variety of reasons. And you have to check with the registrar to understand, like, what are those reasons? Are they hard rules or are they suggestions, And then like, if you can't include it, what do you do instead? Like, kind of trying to make it work with, like I said, keeping that cohesion, but also like knowing that there are certain limitations that you have to like navigate, because you're not making a show from scratch, working with like, contemporary artists where you like anything, do whatever, it's like, this is like the restrictions become more and more narrow. And sometimes that can be a good thing, where you're like kind of, these ideas pop up because of the restrictions, but other times it's like you really have to push yourself to think outside the box.
Have there been works that you really wanted to include from the collection in a show that you just weren't able to because of conservation issues or whatever it may be?
Yeah, I think there was one, especially for this show, where I really wanted to include it, and it was quite a large piece, and so it would have taken up like an entire wall.
Wow.
And because I couldn't include it, I had to find several works to replace it.
Oh, okay.
And they were still works that I was excited about, but it changed a lot of like the flow, especially of that first, it was like a 3 galleries and then the spine. And so the first one, it like really changed the composition of that room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because having 2 jobs is not enough for you, you're also a committee member at the Gente Chicana Soimos Chicanos Art Fund in Milwaukee. And I'm sorry if I'm butchering any of this. And a board treasurer at Walker's Point Center for the Arts in Milwaukee. Can you tell us a little bit more about both institutions and kind of what that means?
I'd love to. So those are kind of, I guess, grandmothered in for me. I had moved here from Milwaukee, and so I was involved with those organizations more so before I moved out here. And they're just really close to my heart. I think for a lot of the work that they're doing is just as similar to Ma's House. It's like so community centered, and that's part of why I continue to participate from afar remotely. It's not the same as being in person, but I have a lot of love for those organizations and like want to continue to be of service, in the ways that I can from afar. And so Walker's Point Center for the Arts is run by my friend Chela, who is like the most amazing executive director. Like she's a powerhouse. And they similarly do a lot of like crossover work between showing really great contemporary art, but then also having a robust arts education program, especially a lot of after school programs. And it's during like COVID, like they were making all these art kits and like sending them out to families and stuff, like really being like a community pillar of arts education, not only as like something to do, but like as a learning tool, and also as something that is like building out like a shared understanding of like values. And it's an incredible space. It's so warm and welcoming. So I do, board support, board service continuously. But when I was there, I was helping out with whatever I could, and I was in the space a lot, and just really enjoying, having that community around, because it's such a special thing for an arts organization to build that up. It can be really hard because sometimes people are like, who are you? What are you doing? But Walker's Point has been there for so long now that people like, they know like this is what we're about, and they know it's going to be a good experience. So dear to my heart. If you're in Milwaukee, check them out.
Okay. Plug them.
Yeah. And then for the committee, it's actually a similar like crossover group of folks that I'm connected with, where there's another friend who had gotten this, I think, pretty decent donation to start this fund and pushed it through the Greater Milwaukee Foundation because they kind of like can oversee the infrastructure without you having to start like a separate nonprofit. But it's an annual fund, and we're always looking for, again, like donors to support, because it's based on projects where people can apply for like a range of funding, and really just trying to provide financial support for projects that are like Chicana art, you know? And so it doesn't need to be something specific where it's like just, you know, this is a painting that I'm making. It could be like, I'm working on a series of community workshops, or you can say like, I'm working on like a previous recipient was working on a publication that was like, it was a larger series of publications of Latino art, but then a special edition of Chicano art. And so like, is, you know, there's a lot of different types of projects that can apply. But it's really, I think, a great resource, and, you know, ongoing. You know, I think the main application is on the Greater Milwaukee Foundation's page, again, instead of a separate site, because they kind of are the like fiscal sponsor type. Okay. You know, that's how it makes it a little bit smoother. Yeah. When you have a lot of like volunteer support. To have that overhead is helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure. So now let's backtrack and talk a little bit about your past and what eventually brought you to this place, to New York. So in 2013, you received your BFA in Fine Arts, Studio Arts, with a minor in Visual Arts Management, and you did a semester study abroad program. Please over your ears as I butcher this next name. At Studio Arts École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Just please bear with me.
Excellent.
I need to start learning French. Then you went on to receive your MFA from Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? And then you did another semester study abroad program at Arts Conservation Studio Art Centers International in Florence, Italy. Can you tell us a little bit like what you took away from your school, kind of how it enforced your career? Was it useful at all?
Yeah, no, honestly, I think I was really fortunate to have such a diverse range of experiences with my education, different locations, different, you know, focus of what, you know, my studies were, and different methods of instruction from these different places. I feel like I got a really well-rounded understanding of not only my own approach as a studio artist, but also, you know, thinking about the visual arts management that I did in Chicago was like my first real understanding of what is the business aspect of the arts that I need to understand as a practicing artist, and that I then began pursuing curatorial work because I was like, well, if I can also provide this as a service to my fellow artists, like then that's something that I can feel really good about when I'm like, you know, taking on these different roles. And so especially adding in things like arts conservation, even if I'm not like practicing an arts conservator, having that understanding of what goes into it and some of the different approaches that exist, especially when you think about the differing approaches depending on like what country you're in and what methods and techniques. It really is eye-opening to understand the full picture of what an art object exists within. You know, it's not just, oh, me alone in my studio and here it is. It's like, no, there's this whole business, and there's this whole process of archiving and conserving and restoring it, and there's all these different ways that people can teach about it and learn about it. And so I just feel very fortunate that I was able to get such a well-rounded understanding of that in different countries and different languages. And, you know.
No, these are great opportunities. I mean, you got a chance to, you know, go to different countries, learn kind of their methods of madness in the arts. But no, I feel like you did it's a great, well-rounded education. So then what was your first job outside of school?
Well, you know, I had thought about that for a second because I was like, what was my first job out of school? But then I realized
Like I've done so much, I can't even remember anymore.
No, I was going to say actually, like I have worked pretty much my whole life. So like I've always had a job, even like while in school. And whether it was like a job just to, pay some bills, or if it was a job related to like future career goals, like I've kind of always been working. But I think my very first, technically, my first job when I finished grad school, I had been a curatorial fellow at the Grand Rapids Art Museum. And as that program was ending and as I was graduating, there became an opportunity to be interim curatorial assistant. I had been, working there, built up a good relationship. And I was like kind of transitioning for like, oh, I think I'm about to move. And I'm like trying to figure out job stuff. And then also the curatorial assistant was like about to go on maternity leave. And they're like, hey, we would love for you to like take on this role. And, we know you can do it. And it'd be good experience and all these other things. And so that was technically my first official job post grad school, but I was working before that, like doing gallery work, either, like I said, I had been doing a fellowship. I had been general assistant in a gallery, did a lot of internships and stuff like that. But that was a really great fit at the time because, like I said, I was trying to transition from leaving school into like, what's the next step? And then there became this need of this opening. And it was also a good experience to like take that next step from like growing from like intern fellow, like, assistant, so that was really a nice opportunity that just kind of really worked out.
When you left school, did you already kind of know the trajectory you wanted to have in the arts as an artist curator, or were you still like feeling stuff out, seeing what you might like?
I think I'm always feeling it out.
Okay, fair.
I think I'm just like try to be adaptable, try to be ready for anything. Like a lot of people say, my journey has been so winding. There hasn't been this like straightforward, like, walking up the stairs kind of a thing. And it continues to change, especially when you have big life events like a death in the family. That changed a ton of things for me that I could have never anticipated. And some of them were directly related to my mother's death, and others were kind of like these reverberations of that. And so I think I'm always just trying to go with the flow, stay adaptable. But I definitely, every single time that something new changed, I've been like really grateful and like, wow, I never thought that would happen. Even though I've been open to it and been pursuing it, I still am like, I never expect that something will happen. I just try my best.
That's life. So can you kind of walk us a little bit through on this trajectory of graduating school up until now, kind of like what jobs you've had or what major projects you worked on that really, like stuck with you and were like core memories up until you got here?
Before here. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. It's like I said, it's been very winding. Interestingly enough, I spent a couple of years around like the time, like I was taking care of my mom, and then shortly after her passing, I was actually working at a medical college. I was working in their DEI office, and as just like a general like administrative position. But because this office was focused on like cultural competency and like trying to work with the medical students and the physicians that were attached to the college in different ways, I got the chance to actually curate the office.
Okay.
So I would, work with different community partners that were part of like a lot of the things they were looking at the office were like the structural determinants of health. And so working with different communities that they are partnering for these things and having these pop-up exhibitions that related to that somehow. And so anybody who came in the office would get a little bit of that experience. And then the annual cultural festival was a chance to bring that out of the office and like into the main lobby and like into the main theater and have programming around it. And that was a really great experience because it launched a different aspect of my work that I had always been interested in, but I didn't really know how to do, which was that I started working with some of these students, like these like PhD students and some of these faculty on research projects that they wanted to incorporate the arts as a way to gather and disseminate that research. So if someone's looking at those determinants of health and they're asking questions, like maybe they're asking them through a series of workshops or something, or maybe they're presenting the research results through an exhibition or something. And so getting to work with these researchers as kind of like an artist advisor, as a curator, this, kind of a hybrid role that also included the things that I learned in that office as an administrator. And so that was really special and something I continue to do, not every single day. But one of the programs that I got to be a part of was creating an arts curriculum for incarcerated veterans. And the whole purpose of the program was to reduce recidivism, both through like creating different ways of learning or relearning life skills that sometimes you can get like taken away from you when you're in those circumstances. But also like finding ways to use art as this outlet to like process the experiences that, oftentimes led to these circumstances or were exacerbated once there. And so that was, again, something I never thought would happen. But when I was in it, I was like, this is amazing. I'm like so grateful to be contributing to this, and that these researchers like want to work with me. And then the reason that we connected was because I just decided to take on this role outside of the arts while I was also in this very intense time in my own personal life with a medical situation, you know? So yeah, it was unexpected, but very fulfilling.
So then after that, where did you go to, or what did you do?
I was doing that for a little while, and then I taught for a little while, very, very briefly. I like to teach in the sense of I like to lead workshops, but like teaching an actual like semester is too
Girl, don't get me started on that, because I would be the worst teacher in the world. I hate teaching people anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like, but so I did that for a little while, and then after I had left the medical college, I was still continuing to do work with these researchers. So especially at the beginning of COVID, there was a researcher that I worked with a few times on some NEH projects. And one of them was with the city of Milwaukee, trying to create culturally specific campaigns around like COVID safety habits and using art to do that. So like creating different designs that would go at bus shelters or on billboards, or that are distributed like through the mail with different community centers. And so working with a selection of artists from different communities in the Milwaukee area and really developing projects with them that were specific to like their cultural experience of like what is going to actually reach someone in this time where everybody is so scared. And there's already this background of like mistrust with the medical industry.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yeah. And so really trying to find nuanced and respectful ways of reaching people through that, And so that was kind of an ongoing project for a while. And I did a lot of projects like that as an independent like contractor for a few years.
Freelancer.
Yeah. Freelancing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so take us on the journey through these projects that eventually, what was the project that really brought you to New York? Or what made you be like, you know what, I'm heading to New York?
I actually, when my mother passed away, I had no idea what to do with myself. I was like I was too lost in all of the like I said, the tangled trauma to really see clearly about what I wanted to do. And like, honestly, there were parts where I was like, I don't even want to live,
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to get to a point where I could see through that. And I was like, I just need a fresh start.
Yeah.
I had been living in the same place, like where we had taken care of her. And
where was that? Sorry, because I
What's
didn't. Where was
in Milwaukee?
In Milwaukee. Okay.
Yeah. And
so that's like your home base.
it was.
Okay.
Yeah. My sister and I kind of like got together and were taking care of my mom. And I do think that being able to die in one's home is a really amazing privilege. And I'm grateful that she was able to have that comfort. And so I don't think of it as a bad thing that I was living there. But it did help to like get some separation from that time and space. So I was like, you know what? I need a fresh start. I need to just like go, you know? And I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know like where, but like how I'm going to land. But
Where the wind will blow you.
I'm just going to take a chance, you know? Just to do a little trust fall with myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So what made you pick New York?
Well, I had actually been involved with Ma's house remotely.
Okay.
And I was like, well, I should probably be here. So, yeah.
Okay, fair. So Ma's house really was kind of like the tipping point where you're like, I'm going to try it out. You know, I'm going to go to New York, see how I feel about it. How do you feel about it?
It's a very strange experience being someone like who grew up like in the Midwest. Being on the East Coast is so different. It's not bad. It's just different.
It's different, yeah.
It's very like
different culture.
What is going on?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I think I do fit into that like stereotype of like Midwest nice, you know, and maybe seems a little naive.
You're very sweet. I have to say, I wouldn't say naive, but you have a really sweet, caring energy about you.
Thanks. But I do think that that's like the stereotype of it, that it's like that the niceness comes from like this sense of naivety, you know, of like, oh, you're like, you know, you're not from the big city, like you don't know how things are. You know what I mean? I don't know.
No one knows how things are who live here, so I don't know where they're saying that from.
That's the impression I got not growing up here, you know? So I think I'm still learning what it is to be like a New York person. Although I'm not like in New York City, but being in New York State and like the
New York adjacent.
Yeah, the New York energy. You know what I mean? Especially because being on the east end of Long Island, a lot of people who are in the city are coming out here constantly. And so there's this like weird overlap of like city people, but you're not in the city when you're talking to them. And so, I don't know.
Yeah, especially in Southampton. There's, you know, a lot of like even galleries from the city that have spaces there as well. So
and so it's like an interesting mix. And then I do go into the city a lot for like work and stuff, but not all the time because it's a lot. It's a long trip.
It's a long journey.
You know, if I have to get there, I'm like, okay, I can find a way. But it's an interesting cultural experience that I'm still getting used to.
So how long have you been in New York now officially?
About 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So not a long time, but not a long time.
I forget what they say. Is it like 10 years, 5 years where you become like the official resident of the city that you're dwelling in? I forget what it is.
I don't know.
They always say, oh, you become a native when you've been like there for like 5 or 10 years.
I don't know. I'm definitely not there yet.
No. I've been here for like over 20 years and I still don't feel quite like a New Yorker sometimes. Okay. So now that we talked a little bit about that, I also want to talk about you as a curator. You've worked with a myriad of artists throughout these years. I want to know, what do you like most about working directly with artists?
Gosh, I mean, artists are just so cool. Like, maybe I'm a little biased, but I normally don't think, oh, like I'm so cool, but I look at another artist and I'm like, oh my God, they're so cool. Yeah. So I guess like just getting the chance to really see someone else's creative process on the level of whatever went into the work is part of how the work is presented. And so like having those conversations with them, troubleshooting things, like really collaborating on like kind of almost like creating this piece from their work, you know? Yeah. And so, yeah, I can just like kind of going back to this idea of like trust, where someone is like entrusting you to take care of their work, you know? Yeah. And that's a really special experience. And I always just like get so giddy about like, oh, like I'm a fan of your work. And I'm like, helping to present it. Like that feels really cool.
A little starstruck.
Yeah. Like I'm such a fangirl all the time.
I mean, there's been artists that I've met in my life who like, you know, whose work I've really loved and who have had really long careers. So like when I run into them in person, I like become this weird fangirl version of myself. And I'm like, who is she? So I completely get it. we touched a little bit on this topic earlier in the conversation. That you were the recipient of Hyperallergic's 2023-24 Emily Hall Tremaine Journalism Fellowship for Curators for your curatorial project, Reclaiming Death. But I really want to go a little bit into the specifics of this project that you won this award for.
Yeah, this was an incredible experience. Another one of those, like, never thought this would happen. I say that about everything, though. I'm like, oh my God, I'm a broken record. Yeah. But it was a really huge learning opportunity. Previously, I had done a lot of arts writing for my own like enjoyment or for independent curating or for stuff at the museum. But doing something for like an arts publication is so different. And the way that they have like, you know, you have your line of editors that you're working with and it's very like fast paced, and there's also different ways of writing for that format, right? Which is cool for me to see, because in the same way that like you, depending on the venue, you're going to install the work differently, and depending on the work you're going to install, you know, if it's like has these specs versus these, you're going to install it differently. And so seeing that for writing of like, you're going to write differently because it's in this different method and this different use was a nice way for me to like learn that different like adaptation, I guess, of like arts writing. And especially because it was a 3-part series, there was like this build up to the online exhibition, which is in the form of like an article. But you really got to dive deeper into the research because you had these other articles beforehand that were related to your proposed topic. And so it was a fantastic learning experience. And I also got the chance to like promote some artists that I adore and like the cool, amazing work that they're doing related to death. And because as an artist working in like death and dying, I'm like, there should be more of us talking about this because it is such an amazing tool to reach people. Like art for any difficult topic, art is going to give you another tool to meet someone where they're at. And so I'm like, where are all the other artists talking about death? And so like, you know, I gathered a few of them that I'm closer to, that I had kind of been following their work for a while, and got to bring them into this article and like show their work off. Like that's really, really just something that I always get like kind of like moved by, where I get to see their experience of like having their work talked about in different ways, and just showing off the people that I think are doing amazing stuff. Yeah.
And what was the overarching theme or proposed project for Reclaiming Death?
Yeah, so the show and the project have the same title, Reclaiming Death, and it was really this, I guess, broad survey of how the arts have always been a part of death in terms of like the human experience. Like there's such ancient global traditions of how art is used to be a part of the dying process, the grieving process, the community aspects of honoring mourning, whether that's through, you know, sculptures or paintings or music or dance or fashion. Art has always been a part of that. In a way, this idea of like an artist and this idea of a death doula have always been really connected. And so I was trying to, you know, paint that picture for the reader of like, a lot of times people come up to me when I'm saying like, oh, what do you do? And I talk about what I do. And they're like, how did you, why did you start making art about death? And I'm like,
that was me. When you wrote that you were a death doula, I'm like, oh my God, I need to talk about this.
But it's funny because I'm like, I think to myself, like, artists have always been talking about death. Maybe not in the way that we talk about it today, because we have all these added like layers of separation, but artists have always been like hand in hand with death.
You're right. Yeah.
And it's just something that I wanted to talk a little bit more about as a preface for the contemporary artists that are making work about death in new ways today. And so the 3 articles kind of gave this survey arc of that. Like the first one was focused on these more traditional practices that have always existed. The second article was focused on artists who are also actively doing death work. And so artists who are also death doulas or artists who are also activists around death and dying. So like actually Denise Silva Dennis, who does the workshops here, I had included her in that second article because a lot of her work as an artist crossing over with death work is around graves protections. She is a board member of the Nehemiah Land Trust and the Graves Protection Warrior Society, which is looking at Long Island to protect Native graves, either that have already been disturbed or ones that like need to be protected so they're not disturbed in the future. And like for me, seeing an artist do death work in that way is like just as important as an artist who's, you know, doing bedside death doula service. And so wanting to highlight the artists that are already doing those things. And then the final article, which was like more formally the exhibition, was looking at specific art objects and art installations that were handling literal death. You know, I think sometimes people like to use death as a metaphor for other things that are also painful, but they're not talking about like a person dying. And so I think it's important to talk about a literal person dying. And these artists are doing that in really nuanced and thoughtful ways. And I wanted to just celebrate how they're doing that work. You know, some of them are really personal stories of like losing a sibling, and others are more broad, like looking politically at political violence and how that can create like a form of disenfranchised grief where someone maybe feels like they're not allowed to mourn, or they could be compromised for mourning because the death of their loved one was the result of this political violence that has a larger hold on a community, you know? And so it kind of ranged in that way, but really just trying to celebrate the continuation of artists dealing with death that is both in support of community members who are experiencing loss, but also critical of the way that we interact with death in our society and like how we can be better at it. Yeah.
And now we can look forward to it becoming a physical exhibition. And it's going to be at Ma's house?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So the physical version will be here. It'll be a little bit different than the online version. It had some site-specific installations from previous exhibitions that artists had done. And so with this being a different space and also, you know, a different time in whatever they're working on in their studio, we'll have some new things. Yeah. And then, you know, trying to add a couple folks who maybe weren't on the online version, but I've like since, you know, locally gotten in contact with, and, you know, having that slightly different experience of the show.
Do you have a date yet or not yet?
Yeah. So it's, let me double check my phone.
Yes. Go ahead.
It's like right before the fundraiser is when it opens, but let's see.
Sometime in September?
Yes. So yeah. So it'll like September 15th is when it is up. We haven't set the opening reception date yet. We tend to do that a little bit closer to the show openings because there's always so many events happening that we try not to like overlap too many things. Sometimes, most of the time it's the first weekend that the show's up, but given that we have the fundraiser event, we'll probably push it a week or two just to like, it'll be more of like a mid celebration, mid run celebration or something like that. But we'll definitely post about it when it's finalized. You know, get the word out and hopefully have some programs with some of the artists who are close enough to stop by.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah.
But now that we've talked about your career trajectory, and on top of everything, you're obviously also a prolific writer, as we know, and have written for publications. You've been featured on numerous podcasts, which we spoke about earlier before we started this one. You've received awards, grants, and honors. During this entire journey, have you faced any specific challenges in the industry as a woman?
Oh my God, yeah. I feel like that's kind of a given, you know? There's, you know, I could probably anonymously describe a couple specific instances, but in general, there's still such a strong bias towards male artists that, I mean, it's been there for so long that it's like hard to avoid.
Yeah.
And it's not that people aren't like trying to be mindful of it in some ways, but, you know, I think it's just one of those things that you have to be realistic about, like not assuming that that it's not there, but also not like not trying because you know that it's probably a factor, you know? So I've definitely had some situations where I, you know, was told by X number of people involved in a situation that, you know, I was this like perfect candidate for an opportunity with my work. But then there was somebody who preferred, you know, to work with a man.
The audacity.
And you know, nobody can say like legally that you can't, you know, but like it was brought to my attention by people who, you know, they wanted to like be upfront with me about like what happened. Like it wasn't that my application wasn't good or that my proposal wasn't, you know, something that they were excited about. And it, you know, it can be disheartening. But I think it's, again, one of those things where like you can't let it stop you from trying, because then I had applied for that same opportunity a couple years later and it did work out, you know? And so I don't know. It's like, I know it's something to navigate, but it's not every single time. It's just, it's kind of like a general bias that's just there.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think also it's interesting how it plays out because what do they say? Like the stereotype of when you're in art school, it's like a bunch of women. And then most of the people who end up becoming like really acclaimed are the two guys that were in your class.
Yeah.
And so just trying to not let that like make me overthink what I'm doing and how I'm working, because I do have an approach to projects that I think some people could perceive as being this like stereotypical feminine way of doing something that is often looked down on. I really believe in like the arts as a healing tool. And you say like art therapy and someone's like, oh, that's like this gentle, womanly way of,
it's feminine.
And I'm like, no, I want to show you a skull. And like, I want to like talk to you about someone's bodily fluids like oozing out and like how to be mindful about taking care of it.
Yeah.
Because this is like this traumatic experience. Like, but people kind of see it as like, you know, this stereotype of like, oh, of course, like the woman is doing these like.
Yeah, because care is predominantly seen as women's work.
Exactly. And I mean, even in a lot of my research around caregiving, it was not a surprise to me, but to find the actual statistics of who is more likely to become the caregiver in the family situation, even if they don't have the resources to do so, it's more often than not women.
100%.
And so it's just, I think because that is inherently a part of a lot of the artwork that I do and a lot of my approach to like education and curatorial work, of like focusing on those things that can kind of be stereotyped in that way. I do like keep it in the back of my mind of like not letting it get to me, but also like remembering to push forward even harder, you know, because you never know like who's going to be there that does hold that bias a little more strongly. And it's a barrier, you know. I think it's just something that permeates.
Yeah.
But again, not a reason to like give up.
Yeah.
Just something to be aware of.
Exactly. No, that's well put. Before we head into the fire round of questions, my last question to you is, what sort of advice would you give for incoming women into the industry or women who are already in the industry?
You know, I don't know if it's anything like specific, but more so on the same vein of like pushing forward anyway, is like things have evolved so much even over like the past 10 years in terms of opportunities and being able to like crack open some of these biases. It's not like, it's definitely not done, you know, but I think the chance for things to push forward even more is like now more than ever, like revealing itself, I guess. And so I guess just like I said a few minutes ago, just being mindful of it, but not letting it stop you. Like you have to keep trying, even if you continuously get those rejections. Like everybody does,
Yeah.
you know, and it's really easy to think that all of them are because of that, but sometimes it's not. And you just have to like keep putting yourself out there. Apply 5 times.
Yes.
You know, like you might not get it the first 4.
I mean, listen, rejection is a part of everybody's life. So
It's something that you just have to like be okay with and like don't internalize it.
Yeah.
You know, you can be aware of a situation and know that, yeah, this person had this bias and that went into their decision, but you can't take it personally and let it stop you from trying again or trying other things that, you know, you still want to go after.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like pretty generic, but that's what I say.
No, but it's true. I mean, imagine if like the first wave of feminism stopped because they were just like, this is too hard.
Like,
you know, they don't like me.
They said no, so I guess.
Exactly. No, you keep fighting. You know, it's not just for yourself at some point. It's also for other women. So that's great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. You know.
Are you ready for the fire round of questions?
I don't know. Am I? I guess.
I think you are, yeah. So I have 10 questions.
Okay.
I'll let you pick a number between 1 and 10, and then I'll read the corresponding question.
Okay. 4.
4. What is a passion project you want to complete?
A passion project I want
in your lifetime.
In my lifetime.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I have so many.
Okay, pick your top one.
I don't know. That's such a hard question. But okay. If I have to like pick something, just so a lot of these burial markers that I've made out of living plants, I've attempted a couple of times to make them in like an outdoor setting, but on a very small scale. And I would just love to like either in a park or in an actual cemetery, like create like a large scale installation of them that is living throughout the whole year. And that doesn't mean that it's blooming the whole year, but like that, like some of the other versions I made, you know, maybe the deer ate them or like they weren't frost like tolerant. And so they just didn't have that annual cycle of like blooming, shedding, like being dormant and coming back. Like I want to see that whole process. And I would need a space that would allow me to do this, but I would also need like a funding source to like, because plants are expensive.
Oh, yes.
Oh my
Surprisingly.
God. Soil is expensive.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the?
It's literally like in my backyard. Come on.
In the ground. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a project that I want to do hopefully soonish, but I have to figure out how to make that happen.
What is that place called? Is it Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn?
Yeah, actually I've done a couple of programs with them. Well, I did a workshop and lecture there last year, which was really nice. I'm a big fan of their work.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah,
it's amazing work that they're doing, especially with like education and like, being dedicated to like being a community space for that. It's amazing. But yeah, I'm a big fan of theirs.
Yeah, me too. I only recently learned about them maybe like a year ago, and I absolutely love their programming and the work that they do. Okay, second question. Pick a number.
9.
9. What do you always travel with?
What do I always travel with? My phone?
Why does everybody say that?
I don't know.
Obviously, yes, that is a given.
I don't know. I travel really light.
Okay.
I don't like carrying a lot of stuff, especially like if I have to fly somewhere. If it's possible, if it's humanly possible, I do not have a checked bag. I don't care if I'm like wearing the same 3 things like the whole time. I don't want to have to wait for a bag.
Oh, believe me, I know the struggle.
So yeah, I'm like, my phone and like my wallet and I don't know, a water bottle. Or something.
You know what? Fine. Yeah. Okay. One more question. Pick a number.
Oh, okay. 2.
2. Name a book or film that had a profound influence on your life.
A book or film. Oh my gosh. I feel like I have.
You research a lot and you read a lot, so I don't know. This might be tough for you.
Yeah, no. I've also this year alone. I did another like research deep dive, and I read like so much within a short amount of time that I'm like, oh my God, I don't even remember everything that I've read. Gosh. That had a profound impact.
Something that you just carry with you forever.
Carry with me. That's a big question. This is a rapid fire question.
These are hard.
Yeah, this is intense. Gosh, I don't know. I do love to read, and I feel like I've had a lot of books that have like resonated in different ways. You know, this is going to sound a little weird. I wouldn't, this is probably not the answer, but this is just something that comes to mind.
Okay. Listen, the weirder the better. Just go for it.
So, have you ever heard of the movie The Babadook?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my! I love that movie. One, I'm a huge fan of like horror,
Same.
and I love the book.
Yeah.
And the film scared the crap out of me.
It's so good,
but it's so beautifully made.
It's cinematically it's gorgeous, and I'm also a big horror fan.
Yeah.
I grew up like just binging on horror movies, like especially like the bad ones.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, my favorite, like the 80s slashers. Yeah. Oh my god,
so
I love doing marathons of those.
So I saw this movie actually before my mom died. And spoiler alert, the whole movie is like this huge metaphor for grief.
Yes.
And it's done so beautifully, and like, I mean, the craftsmanship of the film itself is gorgeous. The story, like the narrative, everything is a great film, you know? But then also the meaning of it, I think, is really powerful because it presents it, you know, it's again, it's art presenting loss and grief in a unique way that is an access point for someone who maybe can't be reached in another way. Maybe somebody who like doesn't understand what their loved one is going through, or their friend who lost somebody, can see this and get a little glimpse into like how internally you're navigating so much in trying to come to terms with what's happened to you, especially when there's like a layer of like trauma for the way that someone died. It's always hard to lose someone, but then especially when you add in, you know, a traumatic cause of death, it can really shift things even more. But then also for people who are dealing with grief, to feel seen, and also to feel like at the end that there is not necessarily this cookie cutter kind of picture perfect, everything's fine now ending, but that you can find a way to integrate your grief into your life and still have a really full and joyful life living with your grief. Yeah. It really like, this was even, I had lost some other family members before, but definitely my mother was the closest one. And so I didn't really understand the full impact of the movie until after she passed. But even when I saw it, having experienced the other losses that I did, I really felt like it hit something that I was so pleasantly surprised by, but also like, you know, I was like crying. Yeah. It's like, oh God, you know, I just thought they did it so well. And on top of it, it was also a great horror movie.
Yeah, no, you know, it's so interesting because as you're talking, I was thinking the same thing where I first saw it when it came out and I was like, it scared the crap out of me. Great horror movie, beautifully done. And yes, it is about grief. But then I rewatched and I was like, I'm never watching this again because it really like scared me. But then I did rewatch it again after my grandpa's passed away and it hit completely different. I really like understood it and understood how they portrayed grief in it. Yeah. So I feel like it's such a multi-layered film. Right. With so many metaphors that I feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to.
And you know, I think one of my favorite parts about that is overall like the way that they portray the mother coming to terms and like understanding her own grief is really important. But I think the way that they show how it affects her son is so incredible. Something that I talk about a lot, especially like when I do workshops with youth, is like how often children are totally ignored when it comes to talking about death and dying and how detrimental it can be to them. Like you see in the movie how this boy, like he wasn't even alive when this happened, but it's caused him such trauma because of how his mother and the people around him are reacting to it. And he doesn't understand what's happened. And he's just having to navigate it like in isolation, not really knowing why anybody is the way that they are, not having this person that he's supposed to have. And it's just, I think it's just so important to keep talking about that when it comes to supporting children in grief, because no matter how old they are, they're still experiencing it and they need understanding and support just like we do. And something that I think about a lot is how if we would kind of get over this fear of bringing that conversation to children and like figure out how to start it, then those kids are going to grow up knowing how to healthily talk about death.
Yeah.
And then they'll have a better time dealing with it on their own and with their children. And so that was something that I also really appreciated about the film, because it covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you actually bring that up, because one of my earliest childhood memories is actually being at my great grandma's funeral. And this is in the times where, like, in Poland, when you passed away, the body would be displayed literally like in the living room in a casket. And people would come in, you know, say their goodbye, say prayers, and then they would take the body in like a funeral procession to the cemetery. And I was like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 at the time. And there's this photo, which I still remember to this day, with me just standing over the casket, just looking at my great grandma, like not fully understanding what happened, obviously. And then everyone kind of just brushed the kids off.
Right.
No one would really talk about it. I had no idea what was happening. Like I understood she was gone, but like as a child, how do you really process grief? And I feel like I carried that sort of thing with me of death, of grief, that sort of, you know, distance up until, you know, I got older, and then my grandparents passed away, who I was extremely close with. And I didn't really know how to grieve until like I went to therapy and spoke to my therapist and really processed those emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so layered. And you're right. People just kind of like brush kids aside.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're going through it too. And they need your support. And it's hard because a lot of adults don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to handle their own feelings about it. But it just compounds, especially when you're a child and you're constantly like growing and experiencing other things for the first time. And then you throw that into the mix. Like, we can't expect children to be able to navigate that by themselves.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to end well.
Yeah. No, I feel like now people are, well, maybe the next generation of people, you know, like who are having children are more open to having these sorts of discussions, because obviously like my parents who were, you know, there's also a very different cultural stereotype when you're Polish and, you know, people don't really talk about their feelings and therapy's like nonsense to them and all this craziness. But I feel like now this new generation of parents is really more open to having these discussions with their children and being a little bit kinder and more understanding and explaining things to kids rather than like how my parents were, for example.
Yeah, no, I think it's a positive trend.
Yeah. Well, after that heavy conversation, no, but thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You were so lovely. You have such a great energy about you.
Thank you.
But thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience and, you know, and your advice. And yeah, just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. This is such a lovely conversation. I'm glad to be part of it.
Yeah. Anytime you want to come back, just give me a shout. And I'm looking forward to the exhibition in September.
Yes. Stay tuned to the newsletter.
Yes. And then to all my Art Pod viewers, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.